All right, let's jump into today's deep dive. We've got a really interesting mix of sources that all point to a sort of hidden side of the financial world.
Yeah, definitely a lot to unpack here.
We've got a potential SEC crackdown on short sellers, signs that the market might be a bit overvalued right now, and even some whispers about hidden trading practices that, well, let's just say they might be a bit more common than you think.
It's fascinating, isn't it, how these sources, even though they seem different on the surface, all kind of touch on this idea of like information imbalance in the market. Who knows what, and how does that actually affect the way things work?
Definitely something to think about, especially for anyone who's, got skin in the game.
Absolutely.
So let's start with this Bloomberg article that caught my eye about the SEC going after Andrew Left from Citron Research.
Oh, interesting.
Now, if you're not familiar with Citron, they're known for those kind of hard-hitting reports on companies that they think are, well, basically overpriced.
Right. And they've been right, like, more often than not, haven't they?
Yeah, exactly. But this time, it's actually Left's associate, Ryan Choi, who's in trouble. The SEC is saying that some of his tweets about certain companies were actually misleading, trying to manipulate stock prices, for his own profit.
Hmm.
So I guess the question is, where's the line between, providing valuable insights about the market and using information for personal gain? It's a bit of a gray area, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, you have to remember short selling, which is what Citron was all about, is essentially betting against a company.
Right.
So they actually make money when the stock price goes down. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. It can actually help the market be more efficient.
Right, right.
But in this case, the SEC seems to be saying that Choi went too far.
Yeah, and there's this really strange detail about Choi's settlement that I couldn't get over. So he agreed not to admit or deny the allegations.
Oh, well.
But he's also not allowed to publicly say that the SEC is wrong.
Huh. That's interesting.
So Left's lawyer is calling it a hallmark of a coerced settlement, which basically means that, maybe Choi felt pressure to just settle, maybe to protect himself in the bigger case against Left.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, if the SEC had a really strong case against him, why wouldn't he just admit it?
Exactly. So it makes you wonder if maybe they don't have as much on him as they're letting on.
Yeah.
And the article mentions this specific example of Choi making a quick profit from trades in Huzu's core. The ticker symbol is VUZI based on Left's tweets. So it definitely raises some eyebrows.
It does. It really goes to the heart of this whole debate about, like, how transparent should short sellers be? Should they have to tell everyone exactly what they're doing, even if that could, kind of tip off the market?
Right. And leftist argument, at least according to the article, is that if they have to reveal all their strategies and everything, it could actually hurt their research and ultimately hurt the market. He says 80% of Citron's Pearls predictions have been accurate, and they always include those disclosures about, their active trading.
Right, right.
But, is that enough? Do we need even stricter regulations to make sure that investors are protected from potential manipulation?
That's a tough one. I mean, on the one hand, more transparency could definitely help stop people from taking advantage of, not everyone knowing everything.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, it could also discourage people from doing that kind of research and analysis in the first place.
Right, right. It's like, what's the balance?
Exactly. And as an investor, this whole case really just shows how important it is to be, critical.
Yeah.
Don't just blindly trust anyone. Do your own research. Figure out what their motivations might be. You know what I mean?
Oh, absolutely. That's good advice.
Make your own decisions. Don't just follow the crowd.
Okay, so speaking of, potentially misleading market signals, let's move on to this Reddit post about the Buffett indicator.
Oh, yeah, that's an interesting one.
So apparently it's hit a record high, like 200%, which is even higher than it was during the dot-com bubble.
Wow.
And for anyone who's not familiar, the Buffett indicator, it's basically just comparing the total value of the stock market to the country's GDP.
Right. So the higher that number is, the more likely it is that the market is overvalued.
Exactly. So, 200%. That's a pretty big red flag, wouldn't you say?
Yeah. I mean, historically, when this indicator gets that high, we've seen some pretty significant corrections. So while some people on Reddit are saying it's outdated, doesn't really apply in a global market anymore,
Right.
I think it's definitely something to pay attention to.
Yeah, I have to admit, when I first saw that 200%, I was like, whoa, okay, this is something.
Yeah.
But then, like you said, I saw some people in the comments saying, well, hold on, this indicator is very, very U.S.-centric.
Right.
It doesn't really account for, how global a lot of companies are these days.
Right.
So is that a valid point? Or is that just people, trying to convince themselves that everything's fine?
Well, there's some truth to it. It's not, a perfect measure,
Yeah.
but I think it's still useful, especially when you look at it with other indicators. It's not the only thing you should be looking at.
Right, right. It's all about the bigger picture.
Exactly.
Okay, so I guess the question is, what should investors do with this information? I mean, should we be, like, panicking,
Yeah.
selling everything?
Well, I wouldn't say panic is ever a good strategy,
Yeah.
but it's definitely a good time to just, take a look at your portfolio, see how much risk you're comfortable with.
Right.
Maybe think about rebalancing if you're too heavily invested in certain areas.
Maybe not the time to, like, go all in on meme stocks.
Probably not. Speculative investments, they can be tempting, especially when the market's doing well, but when things are potentially overvalued, the risk is just much higher.
Okay, good to know. So let's move on to something even more potentially concerning. There are these allegations about illegal practices by FINRA, the organization that's supposed to be overseeing brokerage firms and all that.
Right, right.
And this Frank Nez article, it really doesn't hold back. It basically accuses FINRA of running these secret trading platforms that make it really hard to track what's going on and could even be used for market manipulation.
Wow.
And what's really interesting here is that FINRA is both a regulator and a market participant.
Yeah, I see where this is going.
Right. So on the one hand, they're supposed to be making sure that the market is fair and transparent.
Right.
But on the other hand, they're also involved in trading themselves. So, how objective can they really be?
Yeah, that's a good point. A bit of a conflict of interest there, potentially.
And the article specifically mentions these platforms like OTCC, OTCBB, things like that, saying that they operate basically in the shadows, making it really hard to see what's going on, which of course could be used to hide some shady stuff.
Right, right.
And then there's this whole thing about the MMTLP security, which was misclassified as a bond on these platforms. And apparently there were all sorts of trading irregularities.
Oh, wow.
And the article even quotes some investors who are, understandably furious.
Yeah, I bet.
They're talking about potential manipulation, demanding more transparency from FINRA, and, they have a right to be upset. If the organization that's supposed to be keeping things honest is potentially playing games, who can you trust?
Right. It really undermines trust in the whole system.
Exactly. And, it all comes back to this theme of information asymmetry that we talked about earlier. Whether it's a short seller using information to their advantage or a regulator operating in secret, when things aren't transparent, it creates an uneven playing field.
Absolutely. It's all about who has the information and who doesn't.
Right. And the article ends with a pretty strong call for Congress to investigate FINRA, basically saying enough is enough. We need to figure out what's really going on here.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And that brings us to our last piece for this section, a Reddit post about someone who actually managed to get the SEC's attention after, like, bombarding them with emails about some suspicious trading activity related to GameStop.
Oh, interesting. GME, huh?
Yeah. So, the SEC, they're not exactly known for being quick to act.
Right.
But they actually responded to this person and said they're keeping track of all the complaints about potential GME manipulation in a database. So, does that mean they're finally taking this seriously?
It's definitely a good sign. The fact that they're actually tracking these complaints suggests that they are paying attention.
Right.
And they mentioned that some complaints are even being sent to other SEC offices, so that's interesting.
Yeah, it makes you wonder, are they building a case? Are we going to see some action soon?
Maybe. The SEC's track record isn't exactly stellar, but the fact that they're acknowledging these concerns, creating a system to track them, it does suggest that public pressure is having an effect.
Okay, that's good to hear. So we talk about some pretty heavy stuff here, but it's not all doom and gloom.
No, not at all.
In part 2, we're going to talk about what you as an investor can actually do with all of this information. How to protect yourself, maybe even push for a more transparent and fair market. So stick around. We'll be right back.
Looking forward to it. All right, so we've seen some potential problems, right? Like accusations of manipulation, those hidden trading practices, and an indicator that's, basically screaming overvalued market. But information is really only useful if you know what to do with it, right? So let's talk about how all of this actually affects you, the listener.
Okay, yeah, that's what I'm here for. Let's say I'm, an investor just trying to make sense of all this. What are the key takeaways I should be focusing on?
Well, I think the biggest thing, honestly, is that even the pros aren't always right. I mean, look at this Citron research case. They have a pretty solid track record, but even they can be wrong, or, even worse, intentionally misleading people.
Yeah, that's a good point. It's so easy to just assume that, because someone's been successful in the past, they'll always be right.
Exactly. And this whole debate about transparency for short sellers, it's really important. But even without perfect transparency, you can still protect yourself.
Okay, how?
Just be skeptical, Don't take everything they say at face value. Look for those disclosures, consider their track record, and really think about what their motivations might be.
Makes sense. Don't let yourself get caught up in the hype.
Right. Make your own decisions based on, solid research and analysis.
All right, so what about this Buffett indicator that's like flashing red right now? Should I be, selling everything, heading for the hills?
I wouldn't say panic is ever the answer,
Yeah.
but it's definitely like a wake-up call, a good time to, check your portfolio, see if you're comfortable with the level of risk you're taking.
Right.
And if you're, really heavily invested in certain areas that are, particularly vulnerable, maybe think about diversifying a bit.
So maybe not the best time to YOLO it all on meme stocks.
Yeah, probably not. Speculative investments, they can be fun, but when valuations are high like this, the risk just goes up even more.
All right, good to know. So these allegations against Fanra, this is pretty concerning, right? If the organization that's supposed to be, like the referee, is potentially cheating, that's not good.
Yeah, it's definitely worrying. It really highlights the need for more transparency, more accountability, not just from individual companies, but from the institutions that are supposed to be watching over everything.
So what can investors actually do about this? I mean, how can we protect ourselves?
Well, the most important thing is to be informed. Stay up to date on what's happening, read financial news from reliable sources, follow analysts who have a good track record.
Okay, but there's so much information out there. It's hard to know what to trust.
That's true. That's where critical thinking comes in. Don't just believe everything you read. Consider the source, their biases, whether their analysis is actually supported by, real evidence.
So it's like we need to become financial detectives.
In a way, yeah. And don't be afraid to, talk to other investors, join investment clubs, go to seminars, engage in those online communities. Learning from other people's experiences can be really valuable.
Yeah, that makes sense. Share information, compare notes, all that.
Exactly. And remember, if you see something that seems fishy, report it. The SEC, they might be slow, but they can be responsive to public pressure.
Right, like that Reddit post about the person who emailed them about GME.
Yeah,
Persistence can pay off.
absolutely. The more people who speak up, the harder it is for the bad guys to hide.
So it's not just about protecting ourselves. It's also about, trying to make the system better for everyone.
Exactly. The more informed we all are, the better equipped we are to advocate for a fairer market.
This has been really helpful. I mean, at first it felt like, oh man, the system is rigged. There's nothing we can do. But now it's like, okay, there are things we can do, both to protect ourselves and to push for change.
That's the spirit. Knowledge is power. And in the financial world, that's more true than ever.
So it's not just about the money. It's about understanding how to manage it, how to protect it, how to make it work for you.
Exactly. Now, before we wrap up, there's one more thing I wanted to mention. It's not directly related to, market manipulation or anything, but it's a really important lesson about making good financial decisions, especially when things are as volatile as they are right now.
Okay, I'm intrigued. What is it? Okay, I'm intrigued. What is it?
So it's this advice from a venture capitalist named Larry Cheng, and it's actually pretty relevant to what we've been talking about. He posted on LinkedIn about, what to do if you suddenly come into a lot of money.
Okay.
Like, an IPO, inheritance, even winning the lottery.
Right.
And his advice might surprise you. He says basically, do nothing for a year.
Really?
Yeah, just park the money somewhere safe, like cash, and don't make any big decisions.
Huh. That's interesting. I mean, wouldn't you want to invest it right away, make it grow?
That's what most people would think, right? But his point is that sudden wealth can actually be like a recipe for disaster.
Okay.
People make impulsive decisions, emotional decisions, and they end up losing it all.
Oh, wow.
He's seen it happen, lottery winners, athletes, even experienced entrepreneurs. So this waiting period, it's all about, taking a breath, getting some perspective, and avoiding those classic
It was
mistakes.
like a financial cooling off period, right?
Exactly. Give yourself time to adjust, learn about managing money responsibly, maybe even figure out what your goals are before you start making big moves.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And it kind of ties into what we've been talking about today, right?
Absolutely. Whether you're facing a market crash, dealing with those shady trading practices, or suddenly winning the lottery, the key is to have a clear head and a solid understanding of, the financial landscape.
So it's not just about the money itself, it's about being mentally and emotionally prepared to handle it.
Right. And that takes time. It takes careful thought.
It's like that saying, it's not about how much money you make, it's about how much you keep.
Exactly. And that applies whether you're dealing with millions or just, managing your everyday finances.
Make smart decisions, not emotional ones.
Exactly.
All right, well, we've covered a lot of ground today.
We have.
From short sellers and potential market bubbles to, the importance of financial literacy and even some wisdom from a venture capitalist. Hopefully you're leaving with a better understanding of how things work and, maybe even a little more confidence to navigate the market.
Yeah. And remember, staying informed is just the beginning.
Right.
The real key is to use that knowledge to think critically and to, stand up for your own financial well-being.
And never underestimate the power of, actually doing something,
Yeah.
whether it's reporting something suspicious, demanding more transparency, or just, making informed investment decisions. You can make a difference.
Absolutely. Every little bit helps.
And we'll be here to help you along the way. We've got more deep dives planned, exploring all sorts of interesting topics, helping you become a smarter, more savvy investor. So stay tuned, and until next time, keep diving.
Keep learning, keep questioning, keep pushing for a better system.